The first thing I want to do is say a special thank you to Jill Mutchison. She's there, and she has helped put this together. Fostering Together is hosting this, and it's part of a series that we've done. We've done 2 so far. We're going to do tonight, and then 1 more. The last one, and I hope you'll keep this in mind as we go along, is really going to be, hopefully, just to answer your questions. If you know the question in advance and can send it over, then I can take it some time and look up some information and have that ready. If questions come up on the spot, you're certainly welcome to ask them. So more about that later, and let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us. I am recording. My name is Rose Spidell. I work as one of the Senior Education Ombuds for the Washington State Governor's Office of the Education Ombuds. You can call us OEO. And glad to be here with all of you, taking your time on an evening. Because this is the third of several, I'm going to go really briefly. OEO is a very small state agency, and we're just delighted to be able to partner with groups like Fostering Together to bring workshops like this, webinars out to folks, and hoping that information is helpful. That's part of our charge, is to share information about our state's public education system, aiming to try to tackle the gaps that kids still face, unfortunately, in accessing services and supports and getting successfully through our public education system. In our work, we do work individually with families, and when families give us permission, we can contact schools directly to try to help through a collaborative process, problem-solving approach, to try to help resolve issues in dispute, to try to help clarify communication. And we can talk through different options for families and strategies for working with teams, because it can be a challenge to work with teams in any setting. And that same holds true. There's a lot of benefit from it, but also when you're working with a team of people to support a young person in school. So that's who we are. Our contact information is around and about here. So if someone has more detailed questions that they'd like to see if we can talk through, you can always reach out to our office directly. So today, what I'm hoping for is to be able to work through some hypotheticals. These are fictionalized, but based on some of the kinds of issues that we regularly hear about in our office. And we're going to talk not necessarily about this is what the person should do or you should do if you were in the scenario, these specific steps, but more explore what kind of tools are out there to help and what kind of strategies we might think about, and thinking about how can we keep it focused on the child. In my office, because we're focused on trying to resolve issues going forward, we definitely want to hear about and understand issues that have led up to the situation. We don't want to pretend like it didn't happen, but we really try to be forward focused. In other words, something happened and there may be a reason to do a formal complaint about that, seeking some accountability or some remedy for that. But also a lot of times there's also this need to move forward, regardless of whether there was blame or whatnot. In fact, can we do that first and then go back and think about whether we want to do a complaint looking backwards? So forward focused, child-centered. And one of the things I think is a promise of a team approach is the possibility for creativity and resolution. And that's also a potential promise of informal resolution, where the people working together decide we'll do what we can to try to reach consensus. That gives you more flexibility in deciding how to address a situation. Whereas if you go through a formal complaint process, there's definitely some benefits. You can get a clear decision, but it is putting the decision within the hands of a particular agency or entity, which is often required to follow very specifically the rules and regulations. So there we go. Those are going to be our goals for tonight. And I'm going to try not to go too far afield. But the first hypothetical that I'd like to start with, and just before I get going, let the folks who have joined us sense, if you have questions or thoughts come up, you can use chat and or Q&A to raise those, and I'll pause and check in for questions periodically. Here's our first scenario. Jenna, a sophomore in high school. She hasn't been attending her 6th period math class for about a month now. She would go to the library, and then the librarian asked her what she was doing there, so Jenna started just walking in the hallways. And then this Monday, she was intercepted by one of the assistant principals and brought down to the office. The school called home, and now Jenna is facing discipline for being in the hall without permission, and then for arguing with the assistant principal, or what the assistant principal perceived as arguing when she was told to return to class. So in this scenario, hearing about this hypothetical, some of the first questions that I come back to you with, or in the conversation, let's imagine that we're either Jenna's family member, or we're a close friend, or we're one of the educators working with them and trying to figure out what next. So one of the questions a lot of times in situations like this, even if we're directly involved and we feel like we know everything, there's still a lot of times gaps in just what happened, right? All kinds of questions around why was she not going to math class? You could even have questions very focused around what happened on that Monday in the hallway. What was the back and forth between her and the assistant principal? When we're thinking about this and where to dig in, sometimes you might want to address all kinds of issues at once. Here, we could start talking about the discipline. What kind of discipline is proposed? What's her next step for a meeting, a conference, or an appeal if she doesn't agree with the discipline, or you don't agree with the discipline? What about the attendance to that class? Are we worried that maybe she's not on track to now pass the class, because she is a sophomore, so every class in high school now counts, and trying to get those credits, right, and get towards graduation, and a month outside of a class could make it pretty difficult to keep up. So what happened? It could be a question about any part of the scenario. What are our primary concerns? What can we do next to try to resolve the concerns? And who will we need to work with to try to resolve them? We're going to continue with the hypothetical, but I'd like to keep your attention for a minute on that last question. This is something that we think about and talk about with families a fair amount, which is who do families need to work with to try to resolve concerns about issues that come up at school. And the reason it's so important is that, we'll talk about this later as well, even if you decide to pursue a more formal complaint route and present the complaint, say, to the state or to some other entity to resolve, most often, unless the child is going to move to another school, you still have the day-to-day issue of the child being in school and trying to figure out what that's going to look like from day to day. So even though your dispute or concern might be with the assistant principal is probably also going to be involved, or need to be involved in some way, in the resolution of the concern and the plan for moving forward. So it pushes us to realize and to really think strategically about how are we going to approach problems when we can't, and especially if we won't be able to simply walk away and try to engage someone else, rather than the person with whom we have the concerns or the situation. So let's pretend like we had a chance to talk to Jenna, and because we really wanted to understand what was going on that led her to be out of math class. What was she avoiding there? And she shares that she's been avoiding the class because there's a group of kids there that have been harassing her in school and online. Okay, so at this point, again, we could easily go right back to those same questions because we have a little bit of information, but there's still a lot more questions that we'd want to understand to really know what options we might want to pursue next. As an example, so this slide that I'm showing you now has a list of, I've called them tools and strategies. I think of them as tools. You'll see that they are referencing district policies and state rules on student discipline. We have our updated discipline guide is now posted on our website to kind of walk through those rules. There's also information and links there around harassment, intimidation, and bullying, and then discriminatory harassment. I think of those as tools because, yes, they're the rules or the policies or procedures. What they give us is a description of what some of the options are next for addressing a situation like this one. So our discipline rules for the state are going to describe what the options are for whether it's an informal conference or a grievance or a formal appeal when there has been discipline. So if it's short-term suspension, our next option would be an informal conference with the principal and the person who recommended the discipline. That can give a great opportunity to sit down and talk with those folks who would need to be involved in resolving concerns, right? So that's a tool that tells us we can ask for and expect that kind of conference. The harassment, intimidation, and bullying policy and procedure, as well as information about discriminatory harassment, are additional tools that can help us dig in to understand how to define or label or look for more information about what might have been happening with that group of kids. And then again, what to ask for, what to look for and expect in working with the school to resolve it. And sometimes the school is going to provide this information, but sometimes it's, a family will track it down and say, I've heard about this discrimination or this bullying, and I looked up the policy, and here's where I think we are. I want to have you investigate it. In terms of tools and strategies, I want to highlight the section of this slide that references discriminatory harassment, because sometimes what happens when a student is being bullied is that if they're being bullied on the basis of what we call a protected category or protected characteristic, that can sometimes also be discriminatory harassment. And whether it's bullying or discriminatory harassment, under both, school districts would do an investigation and provide a response and then take steps to try to support the student if that's been happening, make sure that it stops and try to prevent it from happening further. When it involves discriminatory harassment, there is an option for appeal up to the State Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, so OSPI, if the matter is not resolved within the school district. There's also options for complaints to the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights. And so that's where you can take a look. We have a short toolkit on options around complaints around discrimination, including discriminatory harassment. We also have a short toolkit on developing a safety plan for a student who's complained of harassing or bullying conduct. So those are some tools that I think about. And then actually, this next slide, I wanted to give a couple of examples around how Jenna's family might present this to the school and how different ways of presenting the issues could prompt different kinds of conversations. So here we go. As I move to this next slide, if folks have specific questions about the discipline rules or harassment and bullying, please feel free to post those now. But let me move to the next slide, and I'm going to ask for your thoughts on this. This is one potential way that Jenna's family might present their concerns and ask for something from the school after having that conversation with Jenna and hearing that Jenna's been avoiding that class because she's been harassed by her peers. When we hear a situation like that, and especially, this is her grandmother, we're imagining, hearing that, who loves and cares for Jenna and probably feels the pain that Jenna has felt, probably feels, often we feel like, why didn't I know before? We really want to be protective. And when especially if there's fear about how is this person that I love, fear can often lead us to other things like frustration and close to anger, right? Wanting answers. And so sometimes the first questions that come to mind, honestly, when something like this happens is, why didn't somebody say something? Who should have been looking out for her? How could this have happened? Why would it take a month for someone to say something, right? And so those are often the questions that first come to mind. And let's imagine this, this scenario. And first, before I do, I want to thank Jill for a really helpful question, which is, can the policies around bullying and discrimination apply to teachers as well as students? And let's talk about that in just a few minutes, which is, the answer is yes, they apply when a student has been bullied or harassed by a teacher. So in other words, if you take a look at your district's own harassment and bullying policy and procedure, or discrimination or discriminatory harassment policy and procedure, you'll see that it will say that it does apply to bullying or harassing conduct by other students or by staff. And so sometimes it is by teachers. Now, do they apply to teachers in the sense that teachers can raise concerns about themselves being the targets of bullying and harassment? Typically, those concerns are addressed separately in either a teacher's contract or in policies that apply specifically to teachers as employees of the school district. So teachers do have protections against discriminatory harassment themselves, for sure, but the policies and procedures on these slides are ones that are to address bullying and harassment targeted at a student, but it can be coming from either other students or staff. So let's take a look at this example of a potential way to communicate these concerns. Here, I just learned from my granddaughter that she's been harassed for months in her class and no one has done anything about it. Now she's in trouble for trying to avoid the situation. Why didn't her teacher contact me when she was missing class? Why didn't the librarian contact someone about seeing Jenna there? Who is responsible for contacting the family when things like this happen? I want her moved to a different math class immediately, and I want action taken to address the harassment. So, imagine if we are working with this way of presenting the concerns, and you're trying to think through, imagine yourself as the person who receives this, and what might that person focus on? What might the next steps be if this is the communication that the school receives in relation to what's gone on? If anyone has some thoughts around, what the responses might be, what would be perceived as the primary focus, and also what might not be addressed by this communication. Please feel free to weigh in here. And in the meantime, think about, would this communication help engage a conversation that would be child-focused, forward-focused, so trying to move forward and solve problems, and open to creative problem solving, right? So if you receive this email, when you receive it, are you going to focus in on the child? Is it encouraging a focus in on the child? Does it encourage a focus moving forward and creative solutions? What might be missed? Obviously, I created this example, so I have some thoughts about it, right? I'm curious to hear yours and hope you won't hesitate. Well, I'll share a couple while we go through. So it looks to go forward, right? It poses a request. I want her moved to a different math class immediately, right? It's focusing on Jenna, what has happened to her, right? Why didn't people see her? And so we are looking at and thinking about Jenna, thinking about what's happening next for her. My concern would be a little bit with this is there's also questions in there that focus the reader, and we're probably going to assume this goes to the assistant principal, right? It focuses that assistant principal on the teacher also and the teacher's conduct, why didn't the teacher contact the family, and on the librarian, why didn't the librarian contact someone, right? Those, and who's responsible. Those are all really valid, important questions. They focus on those adults, right? And again, we're going to want to know about what's that dynamic between Jenna and the teacher? Was the teacher aware of the harassment and bullying that was going on? How was it that the teacher, right, didn't say something, or this hadn't come up? And then it also asks for something specific, which is to change the math class. The concern about that is sometimes that might be read as a demand rather than a request. So I want her moved immediately. And what if there is not another math class at the same time, or changing the schedule could be difficult, right? It doesn't open that conversation necessarily. It might, right? But it doesn't open that conversation to say, I think we're going to need a new math class, and I want to figure out how we make that happen. It doesn't open the question of where is she now in terms of keeping up with the class. How would she really get back up to where she needs to be, right? So it does focus on the child, but it also asks for essentially, questioning what the adults did. And it looks forward, but it has a very specific request that might be taken as a demand. And I will say that in my experience working with schools, if there is a way to ask for something without making it seem that the school needs to make a determination that one of the staff fell down on the job in order to give you what you want, that it's easier to get those things moving forward. So let me say that a little bit more plainly. If we want to say to the school, let's look at a new math class for Jenna, if they can say yes to that without feeling like they have to make a determination that the teacher messed up and that it wouldn't be fair to make Jenna stay in that teacher's math class, but that they can just say, yeah, there's enough good reasons to move forward, let's do that, then it might be easier to get them to do it if they don't have to first make findings or place blame. So here's a variation on the theme of communicating that I think hopefully also we'll try to see if it focuses in on the child, looks forward, and is open to creative problem solving. So here, the example is, I'd like to schedule a time to meet with you in person as soon as possible to discuss the recent discipline my granddaughter Jenna received. In talking with her about the situation, I learned that she has been avoiding her 6th period class due to harassment from a group of students. I'd like to meet with you and her 6th period teacher to talk about what has been happening and work on a plan together for moving forward. I've attached an incident reporting form that Jenna and I filled out together with more detailed information about the harassment from her peers. Please let me know if you can meet with me sometime before the end of this week. So what's different here? Is there a different focus? What kind of topics might they, let's say they agreed to meet, what kind of topics could be on the table for that meeting? And if they agreed to meet, do you have ideas about how you would approach that conversation at the meeting? And then one of the things that this communication definitely does, and I think the other one also, is calls for some follow-up, right? Let's say you get to have that meeting, then what would you suggest to do after the meeting? So thoughts on this one? Is it looking at the child, right? Is it forward focus? Is it open to solutions? This one, I would say a couple specific ideas, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, which is that it starts by asking for that meeting. So in a meeting, you're potentially have the setup to be able to be more creative, right? So in that meeting, you probably would want to plan to talk about what to do about the math class, right? And if they will schedule that meeting with the teacher, then you would have that person there directly to ask about more about what's been going on in terms of the harassment, but also in terms of where is Jenna in terms of keeping up with the class demands, and how would it work for her to be able to catch up on whatever she's missed and still get to a point where she could earn credits for this class. The other thing is that in presenting the information about the harassment, one of the things, again, that happens is that sometimes sometimes harassment's going on, and for various reasons, the adults are not attuned to it. We haven't heard about it, right? Her grandma didn't know about it because Jenna hadn't shared yet, and she's not in class, right? Um, we might guess that the teacher didn't know about it. We'd like to understand more. Maybe it happened in a way that it was, where the teacher wasn't looking or didn't hear. Um, Part of it could have happened online and in and out of that class, but that's primarily where she would see them. So folks have shared, it is child focused. It offers information about the child's situation instead of just insisting the school provide information and action. And and exactly, and when you're presenting that information, here you present it in a way that says, I talked to her and I learned about this. Now I'm sharing it with you, and I want to work together to figure it out. Um, and I did specifically do this example as a request to work together to find a solution versus a demand. And the reason is that sometimes it feels very fair that a family member, a grandparent in this situation, should be able to demand a change in the class setting, an apology maybe from someone, an explanation, right? It feels fair to demand that. But generally, it doesn't feel good to be on the receiving side of a demand, especially if you feel like you haven't really had a chance to understand this whole situation. And maybe you would offer that once you understand, right? So demands can be off-putting versus requests to try to solve a problem together. And that doesn't mean I wouldn't encourage parents to say, can we change the math class? Or to say, here are the reasons why I think that's really important. Can you tell me what you think, what your ideas are, and how we might get there? But indeed, hopefully what it does is it keeps it open. Because again, imagine this. What if there isn't another math class that would work out? What if somehow this happened and the teacher, hearing about this, really wants to try to work with Jenna to help her catch up and get back to class? And what if the school investigates and agrees that it's actually appropriate to move the other students, right? This would give you that chance to start the conversation and find all those details out, because just changing her math class is not going to be enough for Jenna at this point because she's missed a month. The other key piece in this that I dropped in there is that that I have attached an incident reporting form to outline the information. And here's the reason why. So I do think that in-person conversations are really valuable, and really encourage you to have those. Take advantage of the fact that for a short-term suspension, for example, you can ask for an informal conference with the principal or designee. So you can have that conversation. But don't forget also about doing written advocacy, right? So a meeting or an email written to request a meeting that you can follow up on if you don't hear back. Writing out the information about the harassment and bullying, and specifically using the district's form to report it and to trigger that slightly more formal investigation process to look into it. Also, if a family submits a report and the district investigates it under their harassment and bullying policy or under their discriminatory harassment policy, if you make a formal written complaint under that, then that triggers a district being obligated to respond in writing. And I'll say that one of the things we often hear is this worry, concern, frustration about sharing concerns about harassment or bullying, hearing back, thank you, we're going to work on it, from the folks at the school, but not getting further detail, not getting a written response about whether or not their investigation was found that indeed it happened, right? So by following those specific procedures, putting in a written complaint, you can trigger that obligation on the district also to respond with some written findings of their investigation. So take a look back at those tools, find your district's policy and procedures, and remember that if a student is being bullied because of race, sex, gender, disability, religion. Those are situations that you can ask them to look at under discriminatory harassment if it continues and it's pretty severe and pervasive, and it's had that impact on the child. All righty. So this always does take a little more time. I want to jump to hypothetical number 2, but before I do, I want to invite folks to share any other thoughts, questions about this. Think about, and I don't mean to say that this first example of the communication is all wrong. I do worry in the context of working with schools and folks and teams that demands can be difficult to receive. And when we ask, why didn't this happen, that can sometimes focus a school on defending the staff in their actions versus focusing in on, oh my goodness, how do we have a student that's not been in class for a month? Where's Jenna? How's she doing? What can we do, right? So any final thoughts as we move along on that one? And then I'll go ahead and read hypothetical number 2 because it's fairly complicated. So Ben is our second hypothetical student, and he's in 6th grade. He's already been suspended 5 times this year. The first few suspensions were just 1 day. The 4th was for 3 days, and then most recently for 5 days. Each time it started out, he was getting in trouble, not paying attention, not doing his work, or else disrupting the class in some way. He's become increasingly frustrated, and the last time, Ben got in trouble for arguing with his teacher. The assistant principal said that Ben's words could have been taken as a threat, and that if his behavior continues, he might face even more significant discipline and a possible referral to law enforcement. Ben begs every morning to stay home. He's complained a lot recently about headaches and stomach aches. And when you talk to Ben about what's happening in class, he says his mind just wanders. He really can't remember what the teacher says. And he feels like now they see him as the troublemaker. And so when anything happens in class, he gets the blame. All right. So these are sad. And when we're thinking about this scenario for Ben, it is sad. It's tough, and there's a lot going on there, right? This young man, he's in middle school now, and this has been a tough road. And now he's worried, and we're probably worried now too. Where could this escalate to next? It's significant enough to be suspended 5 times a year. What if it gets further escalated? So, what else? We hear something like that, and there's a lot more that we probably want to know. So here are just a few questions that come to mind, and please add in if you have other questions that you would want to explore in this kind of situation. And I will just pause to say we're starting with questions. We're starting with questions because starting with questions helps us open it up more before we try to solve a situation. And I think that sometimes is something really helpful to remember. When we see a problem, even if we immediately identify some possible solutions, sometimes it's really important to just pause and focus first on asking some more questions. Open it up more, because that might help us find some more appropriate solutions that'll be more effective. So my questions: does Ben have a 504 plan or an IEP? I'm going to assume most folks, if not all, on this webinar are familiar with those terms. The Section 504 plan is a plan for accommodations and related services or supports for a student who has a disability. It's defined as a mental or physical impairment, and they need some accommodations to access school, make progress, etc. The IEP being the individualized educational program for a student who has a disability that fits the more narrow definition for the special education law known as the IDEA and needs special education, in other words, specially designed instruction. So has he been evaluated and found to have a disability and need either a 504 plan or an IEP? How significant are Ben's challenges with focus? Is he understanding the content of class? Is he behind academically? So he's told us himself that he has a hard time focusing and doesn't remember. Is that impacting him so significantly that he's really not understanding, he's not being able to test and complete homework and all that. And then another question here. We have a sixth grader, and so most sixth graders have multiple teachers now at this time in middle school. That's one of the big shifts, right? From elementary to middle and high school. It's just the number of different adults and class settings that kids navigate. And so when we hear of repeated discipline, sometimes we want to ask about pattern for the child and their behavior. So we saw in the hypothetical that for Ben, it comes out as, not paying attention and disrupting class. Well, is that in multiple classes that he's in with various different teachers, or is that really one particular class or one particular teacher, or maybe two, right? So those are some questions. Does anybody else have questions they'd add to this scenario to open it up before we try to zero in on a few solutions or strategies to move forward? If you have those questions, please feel free to add in chat, and we'll take a look at the tools and strategies that might be useful here. So this one again moves us back to student discipline rules, right? And I think the reason I put the general link for our state discipline rules on short-term suspensions, conditions, and limitations, rather than sort of saying, here's what the rule is about them now, is that our state discipline rules have been changing quite a bit, and there's lots of different details around limitations on the length of suspensions and how many total for a school year or a term, depending on the grade of the student. So for younger students, the use of suspensions is a little more limited. For any student, there's limits on when they can use long-term suspensions or expulsions. And then there's also information in those rules about the kinds of educational services or access to educational services that need to continue to be provided when a student is suspended. The other thing I put in here as a tool on this kind of situation is guidance from OSPI's Equity and Civil Rights Office around Section 504. And they have a page there, and they have a few different short guides that they've posted, and they have information about manifestation determinations. So if we go ahead and assume, let's pretend like we learned that Ben does have a 504 plan, and if we went back and did our math, I made it work out so that he's just at about 10 or 11 days of suspension now, and we know that under the manifestation determination rules, if there's going to be more than 10 days of removal for a student with an IEP or a 504 plan, then the school needs to invite the family to come and do what's called the manifestation determination to decide if the conduct that led to the discipline was directly related to or caused by the disability that the student has. And then the third bit of information here is just some of the rule around requesting an initial comprehensive evaluation to see if a student might be eligible for special education, so for that IEP. In this one, I think my sense is the answer to those specific questions really could lead down different pathways. This is a webinar, we're partnering with you, fostering together, and we know that for kids who are in foster care, that process is one where kids are impacted, right, by the trauma of the change in home. And so when they're at school, they can't just leave that all. I mean, there may be ways to help them carry it for a while, help make the school a place that's informed by trauma-sensitive practices. But that's part of their experience now. So Ben, we understand that he was recently placed in foster care. He does, let's assume he does have a 504 plan, and that it was developed to address ADHD. And he's struggling to adjust to this placement out of the home. And so the other piece of information we're going to assume we learn is that the discipline incidents are coming up mostly in one class taught by a particular teacher. So that tells us some. There's still more that we would want to know to figure out, what direction might we want to go in. Now, again, I just would pause for a moment. We read about Ben's situation, and it was really a difficult one to read about, right? And there might be some real frustration or challenge or concern about why has it gotten to 5 suspensions, right? Why is it there now? Couldn't something have been done earlier? And so again, some of our first questions might be why? Why did this happen? Who was responsible? And again, those are really valid and important questions. And I think sometimes we want to be able to ask those questions on one parallel track, and at the same questions, be really zeroing in on what's going on with Ben, what is at play, what is being communicated by the conduct, how are adults responding to him, and what are the different factors. And so, and someone has shared a really helpful comment here, which is, what if you have a student who's come from a different country, hasn't had prior experience in our public schools, and maybe is not familiar with the school rules, right? So if we add that element to Ben here, let's imagine not only has he gone through this difficult change, he also has ADHD. What if he also didn't have familiarity with the rules of the schools? He didn't have an example and a real clear sense of what's expected, right? So if he is sitting in class and the teacher defines it as disruptive, does he understand what he's expected to be doing? How do we make sure that kids know what's expected before we would hold the kid to account for not doing what's expected or for engaging in unexpected or inappropriate behavior? I think that's really fair. And generally, our discipline rules do say, look, first thing first is you got to tell the kids what the rules are. And good practice is you got to make sure that there's understanding there, right? Because if I don't know, I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands of how many have sat down with a young person and read through your school student handbook on conduct and rules and responsibilities and rights. Those tend to be very long, very dense, very detailed, and they don't necessarily leave us with a real concrete sense. If the teacher's talking to one of my peers and I turn around and talk to someone else, am I going to get in trouble, or is that okay because the teacher's talking to someone else, right? And indeed, that might vary from teacher to teacher. So how do we make sure kids know? There's all kinds of questions there, and we have these questions specifically for Ben now. So there might be different directions depending on what we can learn. One of the positives in this scenario is that Ben is sharing a bit about what he's experiencing, right? And that's pretty powerful because kids aren't always able to do that. Whether they don't have the words or they're feeling afraid to speak up about that. But whenever we can cultivate and support kids to share that, I think that helps get us in a better position to know what's going on. All right. So, and we're going to focus in on figuring out what's going on. And a fair question comment, the focus seems to be on trying to minimize the defensiveness of the school partners in order to get to a solution. Great, yes, but what point do you put some onus on the school to provide solutions and direction? And actually, in quite many circumstances, the first obligation is on the school, right? And so, for example, in this kind of situation, we might be fairly thinking, hey, look, how are we getting to the 5th suspension? And how are we getting to the 5th suspension in a school year? Wouldn't we have been invited to come in and have a conversation? Maybe we have, and it didn't result in a change. Maybe we haven't, and now is our chance to push on that and to say, here's what we're going to ask for now. And we might fairly be saying this really should have happened a while ago. But now we know, because there's been at least 10 days of out of school, and it looks like there might be a pattern. But one of the things we can definitely do is request a manifestation determination meeting with the 504 team. And that is a time to say, we need to understand what's been going on and how that relates to the disability. And then think about whether a functional behavior assessment is needed. So if it is determined that the conduct was a manifestation, then there really should be a functional behavior assessment to really figure out what's triggering the behavior, what some alternative ways to address that, reduce the triggers, and teach appropriate replacement behavior. Another thing that I think is important is to talk with the team and the school about trauma-informed strategies for engaging with the student, review and update the accommodations he does have, and then, depending on how significantly he's being impacted by this, and we know it's fairly significant in the disciplinary removals, there's also academic concerns, if we're worried that the accommodations are not going to be sufficient, it might be a time to make a written request for a special ed evaluation. So then, thanks, and this kind of hopefully addresses a little bit of that last question and comment. So sometimes I worry a little bit. I'm suggesting to families and teams, why don't you try this? And they'll say, yes, and I've tried that multiple times, and now I'm wondering what else, right? So indeed, what if you've met several times and you've talked about trauma-informed approaches, and the school, let's imagine they developed a kind of informal behavior plan, and that Ben would ask for a break when he is feeling overwhelmed. And so what else? And how do you push for more? Because where it ended up with the status quo is not acceptable. And the idea that there would be a potential escalation even further for referral to law enforcement is something that we want to push that back and not have that be on the table. We want Ben to be able to be in a space and be safe. And even if he's going to make mistakes, that it's still within something that the school can respond to with the family. So what else could we try? We might, if we thought there was an issue of a disconnect between Ben and that particular teacher, and we thought the teacher was open, we might ask for a meeting. I think one of the things that sometimes gets overlooked a little bit when we are trying to solve disputes in cases like this, sometimes we do want to look for accountability, and we want to think about the kind of formal process or procedures or options. And in those moments of conflict or concern, family and school relationships can become tense. But I think it's worth, in situations like this, thinking and pausing again, thinking about, is there a relationship especially between the teacher and the student, that could get better if we took some time on it? Because we hear in so many different forums and from so many different folks how critical that teacher relationship is, teacher-student relationship. And sometimes we hear, the teacher might not want to sit down and have the conversation, or they might sit down and have the conversation. And I would say, is the teacher allowed to not be open to that kind of conversation? What if they're unwilling to work? I mean, I think in many situations you could push and get the meeting. I think the critical thing is whether and how folks are going to engage openly with that. So, and again, I don't want to over-focus on how to address and minimize defensiveness, but if there is a teacher who's feeling on the spot and they're not able to set that feeling aside and say, oh my goodness, I have not connected with this student. Maybe it's on me, maybe it's on the situation, whatever it is, what I want to do is connect with the student, and the student doesn't feel safe with me. Again, whether it's on me or whatever it is, what I want is for that student to feel safe with me. And so the question is really, are those two people in that relationship ready to sit down and kind of have that open conversation, which is, how can I build that? How can I help this student feel safe with me? And I say the two people, really, again, the primary folks we're looking at are the adults in that situation. Are we ready to sit down and say, my goal is for you to feel safe. I really want to understand where you're at now and how we can build that. And I think you'll find that willingness with many teachers, but there might be some that aren't ready for it yet. There might be some that would be ready for it if it were facilitated by a principal or someone who's comfortable with navigating those moments in relationships that are difficult. But if you come across a teacher that's not comfortable with that and you have a sense of it, definitely we might go back and say, now's the time. Let's look at a different class. We might want to reach up within the system. So we know that schools and school districts are created generally on hierarchies, right? So if we're not able to resolve it with the teacher, with the building principal, we can reach out and reach up to the district level. For a child in foster care, we probably want to reach out to the foster care liaison, who might have some just good strategies, good experience around trying to problem solve, and a good understanding of the different dynamics of being a child in foster care and trying to navigate this. We might also reach out to the general teaching and learning department around, are there some supports they can give to the school here? So definitely reach out, reach up if you need to. So we're running slow on time. I'm sure there's more we could do with this one, but I want to run us through the third scenario, because it's going to bring us to what if we get to the point where this informal problem solving hasn't gotten a resolution. So number 3, again, this one's pretty complicated. I'm sorry to wrap up with this one, but we have an even younger student, Sunny, in the 3rd grade, and she's in the 3rd school that she's attended since starting preschool. She has an IEP, spends most of her time in a special ed self-contained classroom, and since the beginning of this year, she's been restrained 5 times and put into isolation 3 times. Last year, she was frequently sent home when her behavior became physically aggressive. The IEP team has met multiple times already this year. In November, they did a functional behavior assessment, developed a behavior intervention plan. You asked if they could add support, and they explained they already use the classroom paraeducators to provide support to Sunny. They don't have more staff available. The school recently suggested, hey, why don't we have her come later in the day and see if that would reduce the frequency of the aggressive behaviors. You're taking care of Sunny and you're feeling tired, worried, frustrated, not sure what to do next. You're feeling appreciative that at least this year they haven't been sending her home so much, but you're really worried about how she's being impacted by the restraint and the isolation. You have had good communication with this team, but you feel it getting more intense, and you're feeling guilt for not doing more to help Sunny, but you also don't want to be too hard on the school. What do you do? And I don't know if that mix of emotions resonates with folks out there. It feels like that is something that we hear from families. These situations are difficult and complex, and there's not usually an easy route through, and it's not quick, and there's not sort of good guy, bad guy. I don't know how to say that. Sometimes we will encounter situations where we feel like people are really kind of cold to the reality of the situation, or not connecting or caring. But most often we find people care. Sometimes they are tired as well and not sure what to do. And the mix of emotions can make trying to stay child-centered, forward-focused, and creative, especially creative, just that much more difficult. So what are the tools and strategies here? Well, first of all, I would just say that I imagine most of you on this call have been a person who walks with another person in this, right? That you walk alongside, you share information, and you share your ear. And if you're dealing with a situation that's this complex, I just really encourage that. Reach out. And I know too that can take time and energy, right? And it can be hard, and you don't always get that help that's helpful the first time you do. And so, but keep trying. Some of the folks to reach out to might be folks here on this list, so district special ed education directors or supervisors. That one, I would definitely encourage folks in that scenario. I threw in that they had a conversation at the school level around additional staffing support, and the school has said, this is what we've got. This is a district level issue at that point. If the team believes the student needs more support or the staff needs more support in order to support the student, you really want to be bringing the district in if they haven't been brought in already. So you want to look at the district-wide resources and whatnot. You can call our office, Education Ombuds. You can reach out to the Special Ed Parent Liaison at OSPI, PAVE, ARC, Open Doors, other organizations, parent partnerships, Fostering Together. Ask for a meeting facilitator. There's IEP facilitated meetings. And before I go on to the next one, a really helpful question mentioned providing trauma-informed solutions to schools. What are some of the trauma-informed resources schools have to increase their knowledge that we can steer them towards? As a foster parent, experience behaviors that are caused by trauma and then misunderstood or misinterpreted, and lead to false accusations, and what can help schools better understand. There needs to be more. I think there's definitely been increasing conversation around this. The state OSPI has some resources, and they've done some projects around trying to help do trauma-informed professional development. And I think there are groups in various local areas working on that. I definitely could try to look and pull together some stuff and share something out. I'll be back in the office next week and can do that. I would encourage, check with your school district's foster care liaison to see if they have ideas, because they might also be a resource. But I will take some time and research that question and help share some stuff, because it's a critical conversation, and I think it takes more than one conversation to really get it. Well, I sit on a work group, and one of the members is a school social worker, and she just talks really about how critical it is to understand trauma so that we're not misinterpreting and blaming kids for reacting in a way that's caused by trauma, right? We want to move away from the blame of kids to understand and provide support. So what else to do in one of these really complicated situations? Reach out. Also dig in. With that help that you get, dig in. And this is where I would say, if you haven't before, start a practice of doing written advocacy. First written request might be to just check and make sure that you have indeed copies of all the current actual documents that could help a person, you and others working with you, understand from the paper what has been happening and what's supposed to have been happening, what's been tried and what the results were. So that would include, if I were working with this family, I would start by saying, shall we dig in? Let's ask the school for a copy of the current IEP, including the functional behavior assessment and behavior intervention plan, the most recent evaluation report, any and all restraint and isolation reports, and recent IEP goal progress reports. And if there's anything else, and especially if there's some recent prior written notices, if they've had conversations and the district followed up with the prior written notice, which is the written notice that the district is supposed to provide after it makes a decision or gets a request about a student's placement, evaluation, identification, eligibility, or services. And as you're looking at that, one of the big questions before the team digs in and says, this is what we need to do, or as you're working on digging in, is to ask this question of yourselves as a team: do we have current, comprehensive, and accurate understanding of the student's strengths, disabilities, and needs? Sometimes in a situation like this, you'll look at the evaluation information available, and you might decide that either you want to request an early reevaluation, or that this would be a time when you want to ask for an independent educational evaluation. So you can look online at OSPI's special education website, and they have information about those different steps. Here too, I would take some time to focus on relationship. Again, it's not just about trying to be nice, but let's imagine what if you do decide to do a formal complaint and you decide to file a citizen complaint with OSPI, if the district says we're going to cut the day short and you feel like there hasn't been enough supports before deciding to cut a day short, or that whatever else comes up and you decide to do a formal complaint. Formal complaint processes take time, and in the meantime, there's still Sunny and every day looking at what, school, is she going to go to class, what's going to happen there, right? So some of those people are going to still be critical partners. Now, it might be that you're going to talk with the district about doing a change in placement or an interim placement opportunity so that you can reduce the level of escalation and problem solve. But think about how you can stay in open communication even when you're working through this, and how you can stay engaged even when you're feeling that intense mix of emotion. Sometimes families, I think, are a little worried about starting some written advocacy, formal emails, making requests by email, following up by email, asking for a written response, making sure you're getting the written notice, because it feels very formal. It feels like all of a sudden now we're distant, right? Before we just had conversations, and now I'm saying I want everything in writing. It can feel like that. I think for me, what I try to emphasize is that this is a big team of people, and you're probably going to want to add some more. Maybe you're going to get some support from a WISE team. Maybe you're going to connect with an ombuds or an advocate. And the team needs to be able to have shared information. Doing the written back and forth exchange, parent written advocacy or family written advocacy, and district response can help people stay on the same page. And again, even if you ask for or file a formal complaint, how are you going to maintain communication and collaboration? You can get some help for that through facilitated IEP meetings, which is where via OSPI's contract with Sound Options, if the district and the family agree, you can ask to have someone come out and facilitate the IEP meeting. So if the meetings have become difficult and tense, you can ask for the facilitated meeting. You could ask for a mediation, which is really where you're kind of sitting down and focusing in on a concern or a dispute to see if you can resolve it. So I think those are some of the ideas in this situation. I apologize, as usual, we're running down to time, but just a few thoughts to add and leave you with before I sign off and let you go on your evening. I don't have sort of specific marching orders, here are your next steps. And I think sometimes we hear these broad ideas and they don't necessarily move us forward in our next for tomorrow, but I think they can be helpful to reflect on when you're taking a moment, and especially if you're able to be that person walking alongside someone else, or you're in the middle of it right now and you're trying to figure out, what do I do next? What helps teams work? And in every one of these situations, in a way, we're thinking in a team, right? The IEP team is a formal team and there's rules around it. The 504 or, and the foster family and the foster liaison and the teacher, and that's a team. And in the situation where there's an assistant principal and grandma and the student and the teacher, we think about that as a team that's going to have to solve. What do we need to engage well? Transparency is really important, and that's why I always encourage families not to feel afraid to ask school districts to do the written explanations, to follow the procedures that say, I'm going to put in a written report of what I'm concerned about, and I'll ask you to give me the written response, because conversations direct face-to-face can be incredibly valuable and should be a part of it. But having clear, transparent decisions, clear, transparent agreement about what process we're using to make decisions can help it move forward. Also, assuming the best of each other. And that one can be sometimes the hardest if we've been burned or feel like we have been. But if we're able to walk into a conversation or start that email by assuming that this other person wants to engage with us in productive problem solving, then we can use styles sometimes that open up that best mind to engage. Listen to understand. I think sometimes there's this worry that if I give you enough time to express all of that you're believing, and I just sit and listen, that you might think I'm agreeing with you. So I think one of the things is to try to really listen, really understand, and then kind of evaluate whether you agree. Be open to creative solutions, and then, just respecting each other's role and time and effort. I think that's another one that goes both ways. I hear from families sometimes that, they feel like they've been to multiple meetings and don't know what happened. That's one where I go back to transparency. Let's get some clear definition of what we've already decided and what's next. We have a survey for survey link to get your feedback, and then you're welcome to contact us if you'd like to connect more directly. Thank you again to Jill for hosting, and thank you to everyone who signed on.